And he shows up
there he
next,
is.
you know.
Wait a minute.
Like,
Oh, yeah,
there he is.
here.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to an
Morning.
amazing
Morning.
episode. Yeah, good to actually see everybody this morning. And you know, we got like the Brady Bunch squares this morning, so let's get it started. You know,
Do this.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
I don't know, boys. I think we need more energy for that. What do you think? Like, if we got the four of us on here and we're sitting here, we're like, look, you want to know how much havoc the first winter storm causes when you are on the road?
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant.
We don't have to go through the whole thing.
I was gonna say, I think we need viewers first, in order to kind of feel that energy. You know,
No, but you know what? If you feel the energy, the viewers will come. That's for sure.
This reminds me of Celebrity Squares. Remember the show from the 70s?
Yeah. I'm waiting for the Mr. Carter. Ooh.
I love that show.
Awesome.
Good morning,
to see you boys
gents.
in. Yeah, good morning, man.
Yeah.
It's it's a nice Wednesday. Get some weather here. Dean, we're so happy to have you here again this week to basically tell us everything. I was watching the show yesterday, an amazing show with you and Ken. And one of the big things that I saw yesterday was that, you know, like you guys talked about the damages from Hurricane Ian in terms of fruits and vegetables. Can you get into that a little bit?
I can. I've actually got a piece written for my blog post next week, and I'll just quote you some of the damages. The staggering statistic that I didn't share on the show, and I went into the USDA data, the volume of trucks. So think about the Florida produce season kickstarts the national produce season because it's the lowest latitude. So it's the warmest and the soil temp's the best and strawberries come online in January, et cetera, et cetera. So we're at what I call the slack season in produce northbound out of Florida, and the USDA track the weekly truckloads. So when you go in and look at the volume, normally this time of the year, we'd be seeing about 700 truckloads north out of Florida every week loaded with fruit and veg. Last week, 150.
Hey,
Right?
say that again, Dean. Hold on.
So because of Hurricane Ian, the volume of truckloads coming north out of Florida is down 77%. Last week. So why this I think is a reasonably big deal, and I'm glad you brought it up, Ryan, because I was shocked that there was hardly any produce moving because of the damage. It makes complete sense now when you think about the citrus crop has been completely devastated. The total damage bill is going to be closer to $2 billion. And the brokers that we talked to and customers of DAT said that the citrus crop has been completely wiped out because the path of Hurricane Ian went right across the middle third and devastated some of the most productive producing growing regions in the state. So you say, okay, well, it's the slack season, volumes are at their low point in October. Shouldn't be a big deal. The problem is, though, that it's the start of the growing season, planting season down there, and normally by about now they're in a steep upswing in volume heading into November, December, and then sort of going through, peaking in May. So that's the length of and when it gets too hot in May, the produce season falls off quickly. So it's this sort of hump in volume that you see every year that starts about now. So what that means, I guess, is that people will have delayed plantings. You know, because you've got a lot of infrastructure damage too, to things like shade structures, ground cover, uprooted cracked trees, bushes, laid down sugarcane. You know, there's a lot of animals they're trying to ship. A lot of beef cattle have been, have lost their lives. There's a lot of feeder cattle that they're trying to ship out of there. So I think this is going to be a much bigger story because of the damages to, animals, products, citrus. But then, of course, it's going to delay the planting season. And this is an evolving story. But the volume of truckloads is really low. And that means inbound rates are going to have to, as Chuck Snow and Rico Muhammad said last night on Rates and Lanes, you've got to take your backhaul with you. And that means that if you're heading deep into Florida with a reefer, volumes are going to be way down for that traditional northbound produce season.
So you better get money going in order to get you back out somewhere.
Yeah, if you're buying capacity, right, you've got to be thinking about the imbalance in freight. Now, I mean, it's always an imbalance in freight in Florida because you've got in the spot market double the loads go in versus come out in normal times. now you've got a really big imbalance. So it's going to take a while for that to recover. The other thing that you're going to see, and if you look at the USDA reports on the crop report that comes out that lists every fruit and vegetable that's coming into the country at every port, we're starting to see a lot more volume of things from South America. Mexico volumes are starting to ramp up. You'll see a lot more volume from South Africa, Australia for citrus, things, like that. So the produce season is shifting. We'll start to see that the big Church Brothers farm lift in Salinas to Yuma. We tried to talk about that last week, but my audio just didn't let us get there. But we're heading into that period now where produce volumes are going to shift to southern latitudes and port markets.
That's what I was going to ask you, because if when the hurricane came through, if it ruined like orange trees and all that kind of stuff, it's not a matter of just planting them now and they'll be ready, right? Like
correct.
That's years of growth in order to get that produce. And so that's what's going to be my question is there going to be a big shift to some other countries to import produce? It
has to be, I think, because a lot of Florida's citrus is for juicing purposes. Like the general split has always been California's been fresh, whereas Florida's been juicing. So if you start to impact that, then imports or other markets have to fill that void. So I think that's going to be, a pretty big story. Unfortunately, the citrus crop is probably the biggest crop down there that's been impacted. California's got a fairly decent citrus crop, but both markets have been plagued by problems, both drought on the West Coast, but the Florida crop has had disease problems for the last few years. It was already predicted to be the lowest crop in years before Hurricane Ian. So things were not looking good with citrus anyway because of some of the soil problems they've had and virus problems.
Yeah, so produce is going to rise for sure.
Yeah, and I talked to some of our good friends at ANZ Trucking out when I was at the DATCON conference last week, and they were saying that they expect that the produce season in Yuma, Arizona, because you've got really bad drought problems in that Colorado River Basin area. They were saying that they expect production in the Yuma area to be about 70% of what it is normally, where it's leafy greens. So even markets like that are really going to be affected. So, 90% of our leafy greens over winter come from that area. So it's going to have to come from somewhere. I think what it really means for a lot of us, and my wife confirms this in the catering business, it's going to cost us a lot more for food.
Oh yeah.
Think about this unbelievably unfolding story in the Mississippi River with low water levels. Like it's the watershed the water basin that feeds the Mississippi has got to be like almost, when you look at the map, it's almost 2/3 of the country, and it's harvest season. So, but the barges haul a lot of steel, aluminum coils, chemicals, wheat, coal. They're just not moving at anywhere near that velocity. Prices are very high. It's hard to move the volume of freight that a barge moves. You just can't drop it on a truck, at 25 tons at a clip. But what are they? 700, 800 tons, those big barges? Like they're massive. Yeah. So lots happening in the freight market. We've got lots going on. Of course, then we've got diesel prices up 50.5 cents in 3 weeks, and then we've got, Bloomberg reported yesterday that oil demand is at 2007 levels, but oil supplies are at 2008 levels, so the lowest they've been since 2008. Here in New England, our oil reserves are a third of what they would normally be heading into winter. So we've got 25 days supply of diesel according to the EIA, which is about what it was in 2008. So at really low inventories. It's repair season, maintenance season in refineries. We've got fewer refineries overall as it is. So this is sort of another story that's going to start to emerge is diesel prices. And that's why I think you'll see contract freight rates that are going to come into routing guides next year stay high, because the fuel surcharge is up around 68 cents a mile. That to me is the big unknown, is how long diesel prices stay high, because on the same truck that I've been running for a few years, my operating costs are up 8 cents a mile in 3 weeks. And wow. a lot of that's diesel. I'm at if I'm running my business properly, paying my driver 61 cents a mile and paying diesel at what I think is 82 cents a mile now as diesel costs, I'm at 207. $2.07. So I'm not cutting any corners. Like and a lot of guys that own their own trucks won't have the $3,000 a month payments on trucks and trailers, so they can afford to run for a bit less. But for the average person in the market that's running a small truck, operating costs are a really big factor. And then, of course, you add in some of the seasonal demand factors that we've got, and then the possibility of a recession early next year, albeit the experts talk about a rather shallow, short duration one. That's still a big unknown. So lots of uncertainties as we head into what would normally be peak shipping season, Jeff. This is normally when you look forward to pretty good volumes in Q4. Are you seeing what we're hearing, and that is that volumes are pretty muted this time of the year, and see a peak season is sort of not happening?
Mm-hmm. Well, I could tell you there's tons of volumes that are muted. 95% of the people I speak to say their volumes are down.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Across all sectors, when you look at it, it's not in one specific area, it's across the board. When you really look at it.
Seems like it.
Right.
Yeah. And, being logistics professionals, we're trying to keep those costs down, but also as consumers, our prices are rising on our produce and everything else. And you think about the oil, how oil's in all our toys. When you think about, the distribution of oil and the products that they use it in, that trickle down, everybody gets affected no matter which way you look at it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to snowmobile season this year. And I'll tell you, I'm not looking forward to the fuel prices of it, right? Because it's premium fuel, right?
Yeah.
Plus octane boost, and you're running, it's what a 20 somewhere around a 25, 30 liter tank, and it runs you 150, 200K, and you can burn that out in no time.
Right.
I remember last year when we were towards the end of the season when fuel was just a complete asinine number. For the first time ever in the 3 decades I've been 2.5 decades I've been snowmobiling. We sat down and my buddy and I were like, okay, well, we're going to go take a trip up north. And it was one of these things where you stop and you say, okay, so it's $800 in fuel to get there and back in the truck. So then you have 800 there. Then you have hotel. What if the trails die out? What if the snow isn't like what it is? And then we start calling places up there and they're like, it's kind of iffy, if the next couple of days are warm, it's going to be crap. If they stay cold, it's going to be great. So now you're doing one of these, weighing it, because as soon as you get up there, you're $800 in. And never, ever in the time I've been snowmobiling has that ever been a factor, ever. But it has to be now. Like even when you talk about trips, when you talk about going somewhere, when you talk about doing something, you talk about the freight market, think of the shifts in volume that are going to start to take place as other companies or other places start to pick up. And then all these trucking companies that are used to and have the business, have the infrastructure to create that triangle, they're going to have to be like skating to find other stuff. Then that opens up the spot market. That opens up the whole, do it for $50 less, do this. And it just creates that havoc that we all don't like.
Yeah. The other thing, Dan, is like we're spending less, more on services, less on goods. For every dollar in services, it doesn't translate into the same amount that a dollar in physical goods does for trucks to haul. So we're certainly, got less freight to haul. But I think that this is a real challenge. It costs. I've been to like 2 or 3 truck shows this year. Normally I would have been to like a dozen by now. But, it costs $1,500 to fill my 2 tanks on my truck. That'll get me, if I'm an over-the-road driver, that gets me 3 days. So I'm dropping, $1,500 every 3 days in my tank. And why I say that is that's a slap up the side of the face when it comes to operating costs, because suddenly a lot of carriers realized what it meant to understand operating costs and what the fuel surcharge was. And that's why I think a lot of carriers have been able to get by this year, because a lot of guys I talk to say, are you getting the spot rate, or are you getting the spot rate that's got a factor in it for the fuel surcharge if they're in the spot market? And a lot of them say they're getting the fuel surcharge from the carriers they work for or the shippers they work for. So that gives me some hope that carriers have got a lot of viability, built into their business to survive the next quarter, which is going to be pretty rough if diesel prices stay where they are. It's going to affect everybody. Diesel is, we use it in trains, planes, everybody. It's going to hurt everybody. So we've got some, we're not naive enough to think that there aren't headwinds. We've certainly got some headwinds. whether it means a freight recession or not is the other big question. I don't know. I'm sort of on the fence about whether a freight recession is imminent, because you can have an economic recession but not a freight recession, and vice versa.
100%.
Yeah. So, but if I, and Dan, when I sort of talked to you last week about some of the things we could talk about today, some of the demand signals, and again, Jason Miller on LinkedIn is someone you've got to follow. He produces some excellent data analytics. ATA truckload tonnage up 5.5% year over year. So that's heavily weighted towards contract heavier freight. The other data point he pushed out was a really good one about manufacturing, and based on his analysis, manufacturing accounts for 58% of ton miles in trucking. So it's most of the freight in manufacturing, not the headline grabbing retail imports, right? That's a much lower percentage. Manufacturing activity in September up 4.6% year over year. Ryan can't tell Alexa to tell the dog to be quiet. I wish you could. Alexa, quiet that dog. Manufacturing up 4.6% year over year. So that's a really good sign. It shows that, we're not in sort of that recession territory yet. And of course, his Michigan State University ton mile index that measures the activity of 41 freight producing commodities is up about 4% year over year. So if you think about things that trucks haul, there's still good, solid demand out there. We just had record orders of new trucks put into the system in September. So truckload carriers are fairly bullish about what next year looks like. Certainly the spot market is much lower, and for very good reason. Of course, you've got a lot better routing guide compliance now because rates are higher. Why would carriers reject loads at the rate they were with rates as high as they are? So you've got a lot less volume falling out into the spot market. So I think there's a lot more stability in the market now. But we think that the market is headed towards we think contract and spot rates have more room to go down before they come back up. That's important to note. We think there's something like 10 to 15% more movement in spot rates. Diesel prices are going to put a lot of downward pressure on spot rates because there's a kind of a weird balance between the two. But we think late Q1 is when you'll start to see the bottom of this freight cycle based on our current analysis. And so it's going to be a pretty hard time, I think, for a lot of people between now and then, once we get past this rather benign peak season that's sort of unfolding as we speak. And
I can just speak from who I speak to and kind of looking around me. Just in about a 20-kilometer radius of where I live, there's got to be over 1,500 homes going up.
Right.
Like, home builders are building everywhere. Speaking to a buddy of mine who works for one of the largest robotic welding companies on the planet, he says, Dan, orders are insane. Like, the automotive companies are ordering like madmen, which tells me there's something big being pushed down the line, right? And he says, and I'm like, well, when are you delivering? He's like, December, January, February is when the time frame of these robots to deliver them. Look at all this. To me, it says we're actually going to stay healthy in the freight market. Personally, is what I believe, because as prices start increasing, people will stop traveling. They will hold off on traveling for a while. Like, I look at my wife and I, and we're sitting here saying, well, we're going to travel somewhere. And we're trying to figure it out with all my appointments and all that kind of stuff. But we haven't traveled since 2019.
Right.
Really, right? Like, when you look at it, into 2020, just before COVID hit, which we've traveled once since then. So the idea or the thought process is, if it's going to cost $4,000 for what would normally be $2,000, we'll hold off and wait till it goes back down to $2,000. We'll go do something else. And maybe that's a local Airbnb up in Collingwood or somewhere 2 hours north of us, or what I mean? Something, change it up, which means that I'm consuming more physical goods instead of traveling, right? And I see that being more of what's going to happen, because I think people, well, for lack of a better word, I think people got used to it during COVID, right? Where it's like now a lot of families realize, hey, we can go and have a vacation and still have a really good time that doesn't need to be in, say, the Caribbean. Right. Now, other people are just going to be, no, we're gone. So I think there's that variable of everybody, what they're doing. But when I look at the housing market, I mean, I have not seen this much construction in a very long time.
So I did some numbers last night on one of our shows, and I looked at our 2018 single family housing start numbers. So if you read the reports on single family housing starts, they were down about 14% year over year. They were down significantly, like in September from August, but we still built 24,000 more homes than we did in the same time in 2018 and 19. Right, so still building more homes than a really good freight year. I took a swag at how many truckloads of freight go into a single family home, and we come up with 5. When you take into account all the lumber and shingles and things like that. So there's a lot of flatbed demand that's tied to the single family housing market. Of course, multifamily homes are going through a bit of a renaissance. There's a lot of activity. People are looking to build more of those, but that's a different type of freight mix.
And they're talking ICF instead of poured foundations and all that kind of stuff. And then the ICF can go into dry vans, and that changes the freight dynamics of it.
Yeah. And I think the thing we've got is some pretty hard comps. Trying to compare anything to last year is really, really difficult on almost every front now, whether you're talking spot rates or, freight volumes or, last year was such a crazy year because we're still on the tail end of that bullwhip effect from, and I don't mean the bullwhip effect in terms of inventory ordering. I mean, sort of that cause and effect from the pandemic, how it upset things so much. We're still getting back to seasonality. Even the seasonality is starting to, come back into the Canadian spot market. I saw this morning, there's some pretty good trends emerging there. Volumes are down year over year, but it's back to normal seasonal trends, which is a good sign for you guys north of the border.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is. It'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. I mean, for years now, we haven't seen that Q4 spike, though.
In Canada?
And just in the freight world.
Oh, yeah. Right.
The typical, we talked about this many times on the show, where, I mean, when I was a sales rep, when I first started in the industry, like I looked forward to Q4 because that was 50% of my year was Q4. Right. And then all the retail and it's kind of that, before you hibernate in January as a bear, you suck it all in and then you have it all. And then you go and hibernate in January when there's no freight. And you're like, well, I could pay my mortgage this month. I could do that. I made enough commission in November and December, that kind of thing. And we haven't seen it. We talked about this many times, Dean. We haven't seen it in probably, 2022. So probably at least 2 years now.
Right.
Going on.
Well, give an example of how the pandemic has upset things. So this, the amount of vessels sort of backlog in Los Angeles is down to almost zero, and of course we've got a whole bunch on the east and other coast. I was looking at some data around Houston the other day, and we've talked about Houston a lot. So if you think about why we're not seeing normal seasonal patterns, it's because of things that have happened last year that have changed the way freight moves. Houston's a really big one for freight, but not containers. This was break bulk data. So this is just tons of break bulk, which is a lot of flatbed freight. When you think about products like, steel, metal, cargo, project cargo, forest products, heavy machinery, turbines, break bulk tonnage into Houston in the first 7 months of this year are up 56% compared to the first 7 months of last year. Now, steel accounts for about 75% of Houston's break bulk volumes. And according to the folks down there at the Port of Houston, a lot of the surge in break bulk volume has been increased because of oil and gas production in the region. And of course, as we reported on the show last week, the number of oil rigs out in the Permian Basin, or in the state of Texas, to be more accurate, are up 48% in the last month. So you're seeing a lot more break bulk volume come into certain areas that feed certain trailer types. So it's getting very local and trailer type specific. You'll see a lot more reefer volumes, I think, coming into Mobile. It's also a large auto parts, in and out port. But you're seeing they've got a massive refrigerated warehouse facility there. Of course, we talked about Savannah ad nauseum, but I think Houston's one of the really interesting stories because we see a lot of volume coming out of that market in particular that you wouldn't normally expect to see in a normal peak season. And this is because, and it was interesting, the JSC just reported this today, that they have been unable to reach resolution with the ILWU contract and they are not sure they can get it resolved this year because of a dispute that hasn't been able to be resolved in Seattle. Now, remember, the ILW contract that expired on July 1 involves 29 ports or 29,000 workers. Maybe it's 19 ports. I can't remember the exact number, but it's all the West Coast ports. They still haven't reached an agreement. So in some senses, we are fortunate that import volumes have shifted away from the West Coast, because you could imagine what would be happening if there was slow, go slow type activities and disputes going on at ports there. So that's still going on. That scared a lot of shippers away from the West Coast for very good reasons, as it turned out. But it just means that freight is shifting to different places than you'd normally expect it to shift to, and that's what you've got to watch when you're buying capacity. I think is that I don't know that you could say we'll go back to normal, because so much has changed structurally in the way freight moves.
Well, it's a new normal.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you look at just that freight mix moving to the East Coast, and if you look at the dynamics of now the OTR portion of it and how that shifts,
right?
That's crazy, because now you're not only talking just OTR, you're talking chassis, you're talking ability to get in and out of the ports, you're like all of it, A to Z. I mean, I remember we used to pull, close to 2,500 containers out of Savannah, Georgia. And when the hurricane hit back in 17, I think, maybe it was 18. It was a hurricane that came through Savannah. And it was, I thought, okay, well, you know what, infrastructure-wise, we made it. And then we're talking to our suppliers, and they're like, no, man, half our fleet was wiped out because the chassis got twisted.
Right.
So now you have that same volume, but you got half the trucks to move it. And it created a nightmare for months. Like, it's not just something you go, okay, flip a switch. Like, you're hanging posters and one's falling. Okay, we'll just get a tack and tack it up, and you solve it, right? Like, you got to build the chassis. You got to crazy how it impacts it.
There's a piece we're writing next week in my market update on dry van, and it references Ari Ash from the Journal of Commerce. He has a metric called box turns, which is a really interesting measure of supply chain disruption. So think about 53-foot intermodal boxes. Intermodal is about half of what moves on the rails. The rest is carloads of chemicals and coal and things like that. So he's got this box turn metric. And I'll explain, a box turn is essentially the number of revenue paying loads an intermodal container handles in a month, right? So a higher box turn ratio means supply chain is fluid. A lower box turn ratio means there's disruption in the supply chain. So this came out of JB Hunt's earnings call this week, where they were talking about their box turn ratio being down, and I think the number was 6.4% year over year. So if you've got lower box turn ratio, you need more containers to move the same volume. That's essentially what it's showing. But it's an interesting way to think about this, because he goes back to 2013 and looks at the box turn ratio of these 53-foot intermodal boxes. And he said that and the numbers show that we are down. The important point is that the box turn ratio is not improving. It's getting worse, has been getting worse all year. It's down about 7. So JB Hunt were down about 6.4% in the quarter just ended. Ari suggests that, or his data shows that intermodal carriers box turns for all intermodal carriers, all the IMCs, down 7% year over year, down 10% since the start of the pandemic, but down 23% since 2013. So there's been this gradual slowing of box turn ratios in the intermodal space. That's why they need more chassis trailers and more containers to move the same volume. Right. So this is an interesting data point. I've got a really good chart that I'll put in my update next week. So it'll be interesting to track this, because it's the first time I've seen an accurate measure of supply chain fluidity, because it covers, it starts in the port. You've got the chassis trailers, you've got the containers, you've got the shippers who won't unload quick enough. You've got demurrage and detention times at the ramps, all those sorts of things. You've got intermodal shippers or intermodal ramps, grounding containers because there aren't chassis trailers. So you've still got this going on. So we're still, as Lars Jensen said from Vespucci Marine on LinkedIn, he said it was mid-2023 before he thinks the supply chain will get back to normal. And here we are at the start of November, and we've still got box turn ratios heading south and more congestion being reported in the intermodal sector. So still, if you're buying capacity on from IMCs and moving freight on the rails, there's still congestion there. And of course, truckload's probably as fluid as it's ever been, given that there's less demand and more capacity. So it's a viable option, I think, for shippers right now to move freight. The next Ari has a great report. He puts out the Intermodal Savings Index, which is a measure of how much shippers save moving freight on intermodal versus truck. Mm-hmm. And I'll have a report on that soon.
Narrowing now?
It is, because spot rates are dropping, right? So when his measure, we reported this on the show a little while ago, when you get to about a premium of 10% rail over truck, 10% more, it's better to put it on truck because of all the accessorial charges that come with intermodal. So last time he did the report, the premium was about 30%. So shippers were doing very well on intermodal. They were saving a lot of money versus truck. So the next report will be out in the next week or so. It'll be very interesting to see how that stacks up.
Yeah, the intermodal side of it as well, when you're looking about moving from OTR to IMDL, you also have to take a look at whether or not your supply chain can take that extended transit time as well, and how it's going to affect your inventory and the amount of turns that you're going to do in a month. Now, you might get a better savings on that side, but on the backside, what is it going to cost you for the extended time, of having it out and not in your warehouse? Now, also, I was just in Dallas yesterday, in Richardson, as well as Grand Prairie. And I was absolutely amazed. Now, we were talking, Dean, you and I, about the warehousing. The warehousing out there is insane. I've never seen so many warehouses in that area in a very, very long time. On the major roads out there, I saw a lot of flatbeds and a lot of truckloads, more than I've seen over, I would say, the last 10 years, because, it was an eye opener. And these are new facilities, and they are big.
Hello. I think we lost him.
He's he didn't bring the Geek Squad from Texas, but it's crazy that he's actually mentioning that, because even in Texas, I was on a mastermind call yesterday, and they said like the amount of like hot shots, and I remember when I was kind of doing hot shot freight, it was usually out of Texas, and they were up. They've added like 1,700 carriers this month alone, just brand new hot shot guys, right? And
so that's interesting, Ryan. I sat on Interstate 35 in Texas last month, getting some videos from my social media. And I sat under an overpass, so no one could really see me. But the
Were you TikToking in your truck, Dean?
No, I wasn't in the truck. I was in the middle of it. I had an hour break at our DATCon conference, and I thought I've got to go up and because I love watching trucks anyway. But the thing that struck me was the number of hotshot guys running up and down I-35 through Austin. It was really, really eye-opening. Now, I didn't do an exact count because I don't have a baseline, but one of the things I've theorized is that we've seen a big uptick in the number of smaller trucks in the hotshot space in the last 2 years in particular, and they are a big part of all of these new carriers entering the market still today. Hard to nail it down because the government numbers don't break out size of truck. They do break out type of operation, but that gets a little bit messy. It's self-reported information at best. So that's an interesting point. I think there is definitely an increase in the number of non-traditional LTL. I'd love to get Jeff's opinion on this, being closer to shippers, but Nicole Glenn from Candor Expedite, friend of the show, Dan, said on our show that she sees a lot of shippers using the non-traditional LTL network to avoid damages and improve costs and efficiency. So rather than having it handled 6 times through a hub and spoke network, they're dropping it on a maybe a hotshot type configuration or a box truck, and it's one pickup, one drop, and it's a much smaller vehicle. But the point was that stuck. That's been a more sustained level of your method of moving freight. So I just wonder if that's what's driving this. Is there a strong demand for that hotshot type carrier now, nationally, or is it just regional? Is it, the Southwest in particular, where you've got a lot of oil activity, oil drilling?
I saw a lot of those hot shots as well when I was down in that Dallas, Richardson, Grand Prairie area. And the thing is, my point of view is that depending upon how many claims and the high risk and the touch points that you have on the LTL, and if you're looking at regional, super regional moves, maybe it's justified to take that, what you would use on a traditional LTL, and put it on a hot shot and pay that little extra money to ensure that your product's going to get there, and it's going to get there in one piece. And a lot of guys, what they're doing is load to ride as well. They want direct, and they'll pay additional money in order to have that kind of service, because think about it. And what did we say, Dean, a couple of weeks ago? 5 times or 6 times an LTL shipment is handled, right?
Yeah.
By the time that it gets to the end user, depending upon where it's going in the country, right? So maybe that's a swing, something to look into as far as claims and the reasons why people are switching to that hot shot.
Well, I think it's commodity specific too, right? So high value pharmaceuticals, electronics probably have a different handling requirement than, say, trailer axles that are sitting on a couple of wooden skids. Hey, just before we move on, I forgot to share with you the box turn number. So this is I said box turns are down 7% year over year. The number of turns per month was 1.7. So that means the average 53-foot intermodal box does about 1.7 loads per month, which is not a lot, right, over a 4-week period.
That's not a lot at all.
No.
Right? Yeah. But remember, it takes a couple of weeks to position a container somewhere to load it. Like, as Jeff said, there's a really long lead time in repositioning intermodal assets around the country. So it's a long lead time freight task. 1.70, this time a year ago, it was 1.83. Not big differences, but, fairly significant percentages. Going back to 2013, it was 2.2. So we're doing just over 2 loads a month, 2.21, now down to 1.70. Really interesting downward trend. Train velocity is a big part of it. Labor shortages on the rails are another part of it. Weather is a huge part of it. Congestion at ramps inland is a big part of it. But we need a highly functioning, efficient intermodal network for all of our shippers. This is not, not bashing the intermodal network. We're just seeing lots of issues there at the moment.
Do you know that the Canadian LTL network has never been the hub and spoke?
Really?
So ever since I started in this industry, Canadian carriers have always picked up, and whether it be pick up with a local truck and then put on a highway truck and then delivered on the highway truck, but it's never been the hub and spoke. And I remember when I was first starting, anytime somebody said they were using like a yellow, or before it was YRC and all that, I would always say, okay, well, I knew I would beat them in transit for sure, damages for sure. And most of the time price, because I was dealing with Canadian dollar and I had a US exchange of like 1.48, 1.52, right? At those times. And I can't tell you how much business I've won from the hub and spoke just by doing pool distribution instead. And it's funny because it was this is like the way the US was set up for eons, right? Was this with this hub and spoke network. And, and then I remember customers sending me pictures saying, will my freight come in like this? And like, there's a big shoe print in the middle of the box. It's like, how did that shoe print get there? Right. And it's like, and then you order 2 skids and one shows up. And then like 2 weeks later, the second one shows up, and like all these different issues from hitting all these hubs. And it was really interesting because when I first started diving into the way LTL moved across the US, I guess there's a formula to it that works, but I find it such a waste, such a waste of these, maybe regional guys that do the 400 miles or 300 or 250 and then come back 250 and utilizing all this. And just a really interesting way of looking at it. And then looking at the Canadian way. And it's like local trucks go and pick up, bring here, truckload all the way out and deliver on the way.
Dan, we have, it's the same in Australia. Remember, Australia's about a 10% scale model of the US economy, a fairly long distance freight task, but 90% of the freight moves LTL, but it's in 48-foot trailers. And the difference is it's side load. So there's a couple of structural differences. You're paid by what you haul, not by the mile. So there's an incentive to put more in the trailer and put more trailers on. That's why you see multi-combination trailers. But it's not unusual to see a B triple, which is a B train with another 14 pallet lead. In Canadian terms, it's not unusual to see a B triple with a drop deck, curtain-sided trailer. So you load from the side, and you've got mezzanine floors that you can adjust with a forklift. So no pallet. If you got 3 pallets high, all 3 pallets sit on their own floor. So you obviously put your heavy stuff on the bottom, your next layer, you adjust, you put all your lighter stuff in. And so trailers move with very little airspace, but a lot of revenue per load. And you don't see that here because everything's sort of rear load. And rear load's very hard to consolidate, or utilize all of that airspace inside of the trailers. So just different models, but LTL is very different in every country, I suspect.
Yeah. On the LTL side as well, you can do not double stack on all four sides of the pallet, right? And lo and behold, by the time that it gets to the end, to Dan's point, how did that foot get on top of that? And what happens is like, listen, let's call a spade. LTL carriers in the business like we are to make a profit, right? So if there's airspace that's above it, they're going to take a class 250, 300, and 400, and they're going to fill that void with very light stuff, to minimize the claim damage that's going to happen. But a lot of times, no matter if you have those, do not double stack. They're going to put some heavy stuff on top of it, or they'll use the E-Tracks, like you said. In Australia, they got the E-Tracks trailers, the logistics trailers, and then they put flooring on that, and
so they just deck it, right?
Exactly. To utilize that, but it's time, it's more money, So and I was just reading. It's been going on a long time that LTL is trying to reclassify the classification of the products of what they ship and what handles from, class 60, 70, 77 and a half, FAK 85, whatever it might be, that they're looking at that again. So there's going to be some changes coming down the pike. I wouldn't say too far out, but much sooner than we expect.
Yeah, and one little thing too, like even with like LTL, like we did a shipment this week that it was actually cheaper to do it via air freight, right? So instead of actually sending it there through ground, it's actually for a trade show from Quebec to Vancouver. And when I got two rates from the same carrier, and I was like, why is it so much cheaper for air freight? They just said, look, the demand is there, like we're willing to drop our fees on the air freight and get it out there, then put it on a truck. And it's like, okay, well, we can utilize the truck space and get more space for it, right? So I thought that was actually really interesting for us, because that's probably my first.
Was that an Asian airline? Because that would have been a backhaul lane for them, right?
No, it was a Canadian airline.
Canadian airline.
Yeah, Canadian airline. So it was.
So volumes are way down. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was crazy to actually see. It was crazy because I knew that always air freight was going to be more expensive, and I always asked for both options. But to see it actually in an email, so I took it right away. Right, like why wouldn't I? If I can have it there, picked up at 9 a.m., delivered there by 1 p.m., like why not? Right. But I found that really extremely interesting.
So it must have been a pretty small piece.
It was a 3 skid spots, 3 full pallet.
Wow, 3 skid spots was cheaper on air than it was truck.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah,
never have I heard of that.
Wow, never.
And I made sure to get the BOL because it picked up this morning. So like it'll be there by, and it's not.
There's no like $6,000 hidden fee or anything, Ryan, like a fuel surcharge. For
I've used them before, so I'm hoping not. But if it is,
I've never heard of that.
You're gonna find out.
Yeah. No, they're
that is the first time I've ever heard of something like that. Like if you're talking, 12 by 12 box. Yeah, I get it. But 3 skids?
Yeah,
holy
3
crap.
skids and 2,000 pounds per. I was like,
that's
God bless, man.
2,000 pounds per skid?
Per skid,
wow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So
6,000 pounds cheaper than LTL putting in the air.
Amazing.
That's unbelievable.
It was awesome.
Never heard of that.
Right. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's awesome to kind of see. So,
like, where do you have to be in order for that to happen? Yeah.
Call the right people at the right time.
I wanted to ask you about one of the hot lanes that we're seeing in the Canadian spot market is Laredo to Leamington, Ontario. Leamington?
Produce. Yeah, produce. Leamington. All the produce guys are out there.
So this is inbound from Laredo. So what's happens in Leamington? What happens there? Are they growing?
Produce world.
A lot of produce guys.
Yeah, peppers, everything. All the growers are out there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So they're bringing in imports and then repackaging, reselling, I guess.
Yeah, like all the guys Ruchi's out there. What is it? Nature Fresh. Like there's I think like all the produce market, and a lot of cannabis gets out. So I don't know if it's like packaging or anything like that, but a lot of cannabis does get grown and harvested in Leamington as well. So if you want to talk produce, you got to be in Kingsville or Leamington, Ontario, for peppers, fruit, vegetables, everything like that. So.
Well, I mean, the volume, these are reefer volumes, Laredo it says 118% year over year. I'm not sure whether they're talking volume or rates. Up nearly 100% the last month.
Probably both. If I
was just going to say.
Yeah. Either that or someone's smoking some pretty serious weed, but that's...
Listen, here's the thing. So because and I don't know what it is, but I live in a really small town. I think there's a total of 15,000 people in our town.
Right.
3 pot stores. Okay. We have 1 grocery store. We have 4 pizza places and 3 pot stores. Like we're talking 1 Tim Hortons, like one strip, like our 1 main street.
Right.
Like if somebody farts the wrong way, there's traffic for an hour. Like that's how small of a town this is. 3 pot stores.
Pretty chill town, like good town to live in. Everyone's pretty mellow.
Yeah. It's totally chill. It's great. Mellow. I could drive my sled right out of my driveway and go across Canada if the weather was right. Like it's like we're in the country, but 3 pot stores, and it's like and then when you drive around, like we go into a town called Georgetown right near me, and it's like it's almost like Tim Hortons. They're on every corner. And it's just, you know what I mean? It's crazy. It's crazy. Actually, I live in a town called Erin, which is about an hour and a half west of Toronto. But it's just a small country town.
And
that's crazy to think about. Like we have 2 in the plaza across the street. You know, like it's everywhere, right? And
well, if you think about it, you look at the U.S., right? Starbucks on like every corner. That's what the pot stores are now in Ontario. And I'm assuming probably across Canada. I can only speak for Ontario, but it's like every time I go somewhere, it's like, oh, a new pot store is coming up. It's like, how many people are smoking dope here? Like, holy crap.
Well, it's crazy too, right? Like, even if you don't do that store option, like we work with OCS, which is the Ontario Cannabis Store, and you could literally order pot and like have it delivered to your house within like 12 hours, right? So even their supply chain is pretty crazy to think about. And, you know, it's funny you mention that, because I always look at that, because like weed has been legal for 4 years now since Trudeau's taken over. And even for me, when I go outside, I don't smell weed, right? I don't smell anything like that. But when you go to these big events, I went to a Raptors game last week, and then you're like, oh, okay, weed's legal, right? And it's like, okay, this impact, and everybody kind of talks about okay. See that over there. But, you know, has there been any impacts, Dean? Like, I know Colorado, they've had such a big impact in their economy with cannabis being legal. I know other states are starting to kind of loosen it up. I think Biden wants to kind of relax the release, like any kind of criminals who've had like small terms for carrying weed. But is there anything you're kind of seeing on your end?
Beyond a truckload carrier targeting incarcerated people years ago as potential drivers, I've got no insight whatsoever into that side of the industry. Listening to you guys talk, it's occurred to me that when I was at DADCon, I said one of the big problems truckers are dealing with is the madness on the roads, and like people just seem to be crazier since the pandemic, and I don't know whether they forgot how to drive, but there's some serious just madness on the highways, and truckers sort of at the butt of it all the time. I wonder if weed is part of that. People are driving impaired. Is that what's going on?
There's a couple of things that I see with it. So one is it's increasing the junk food market for sure. They've had to have taken a major increase because everybody's going to want the chips, the cookies, and all that kind of stuff after, right?
Yep.
And secondly, I think more people than we see drive impaired on cannabis.
Yeah,
I really do, because you know, you look at it from a couple of different points, right? So for one, I take gummies when I go to sleep because my mind wanders, puts me to bed. I'm great. But I know other people that it's like, wake up in the morning, I'm just going to take one. Right. And so, you know, but they're like, oh no, I don't feel it. So they are impaired, but I don't know what the legal limit is when you talk, I don't know how you would tell that, as opposed to alcohol where it's like 0.08 or whatever, you know, that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it, because now it's a matter of, like, back when I was a kid, first started driving, right? You wanted to get high, you had to smoke pot. There was no, you know, eating gummies or anything like that. But now you can have a gummy, you don't smell. Then you have the second part of it where it was prescribed to people. You know, at the last company I worked at, I remember one operations guy coming in, and I'm looking at him and I'm like, oh my God, like his eyes are blood. I'm like, what? Are you high? And he's like, yeah, I have anxiety. So he literally was allowed to smoke pot because of his anxiety. And how do you say to somebody, well, no, you can't do that? Like, he has anxiety. It's prescribed to him from a doctor. And this is before it was legal, right? But it was prescribed to him from a doctor. Like, he had his card to get it. And so now, you know, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 3:30 in the afternoon. By the time he leaves at 5, his high is not gone.
Yeah.
Right.
So he's definitely driving impaired, but is, you know, you speak to people that smoke pot or take gummies a lot, and they're like, yeah, it's no big deal, right? I mean, I don't know if it's going to contribute to the, you know, the overall craziness on the roads, but, you know, you look at MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, they've now, you know, changed it to high, drunk, you know, that kind of thing. So they're changing their slogan. So obviously there's an impact somewhere in the market.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And then, like, even to your point, Dean, I think honestly the biggest one when it comes to like driving and people like being frustrated, I think everyone's on their cell phone. Like, I don't care what anybody says, like they keep raising the laws here in Canada. Like, I think it's like a couple demerit point, but people don't care. Like, they're not really being enforced or anything like that. But I would say the number one thing is definitely people being distracted by their phones, and whether it be taking stuff for social media, even simple things, right? Even like listening to music, you know, like a lot of cars these days, they don't have CD players anymore, right? So everything is Bluetooth. So you're on Spotify, you're on YouTube, you're like, hey, let me get my jam to play. And that 2 seconds is, because I see it all the time. I see it all. My wife is a big stickler for it, seeing people on their phones. And I think that would contribute to being the number one thing.
It's actually very huge, Ryan.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many trucks I have seen, because I'm very aware, right? Like, when you're in trucking, you become very aware of when a four-wheeler cuts off a truck, or when it gets too close, you're like, that dude just, you know, and you see the driver. But it's amazing how many drivers I see that are like, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you have your phone, you can connect Bluetooth. And I've seen drivers with phones in their ear like this. And then, you know, you can see when they're shifting and they're, you know, it's insane how many phones you see in people's hands.
Add all the other LCD devices they've got in the cab, whether you've got, you know, drive-wise, way in motion, ELD, navigation, music. Some guys have music, you know, movies playing. There's like, I've seen pictures with 7 or 8 different screens that are in the driver's periphery that all emit, you know, light. It makes it very hard to see the road at night if you've got any light in front of your eyes. I don't know how they see, but there's a lot of task saturation that goes on in the driving world, but you've got, it's a bit like we say, you know, drive safely and don't use your cell phone, yet cars come out with all of this connectivity.
Yeah.
But allowing you to be connected. So,
well, and there's the point that driving almost becomes unconscious.
Yes.
Right. Like, and this just isn't truckers. Like, everybody understand, this is cars as well. I remember vividly being on the 401, driving and seeing traffic up ahead. So I start to slow down. And I look beside me, and this guy's in a Cadillac, and he's got a newspaper on his steering wheel, and he's like this.
Yep.
And he looks up, and I'm looking beside me, and I'm like, this dude's gonna slam into that car. And I'm watching it happen. And the dude's reading the newspaper is folded on the guy's steering wheel, and he slams into the car in front of him. And I'm like, like, literally, I watched it happen. I'm like, how, like, and sorry, and stupid. Here's the part. Yeah. How idiotic do you have to be to think on the 401 in rush hour traffic, you can read a newspaper? Like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're a fucking idiot, right? Like, I'm sorry. I gotta say it. Like, so it's I think a lot of what this happens is we get so used to driving. It's like, oh, well, you know, I could do this or I could do that. I mean, how many times have you guys all of a sudden pulled in your driveway from work? And it's like, I don't remember any of that drive. Now,
I was just going to say that
my commute's a little shorter, like Ryan's. Our commute, and, you know, right now, the 4 of us, our commute's pretty short. So I always remember how I get to and from the office. But when I was working an hour and a half away, it was like, I don't know how many times I just pull in a driveway, and it's like, where did that last hour and a half go? Like,
exactly.
Well, Dan, I like that you said that because in Canada we have the 407, which is like the paid highway, right? So if you want to get somewhere fast, you can pay to take this highway. And there's
Mm,
times where my mind like shuts off, like I'm driving because I'm just going straight,
mm,
like I'm going
mm,
straight 30, 40 minutes. And it's not that I'm doing anything, but it's just like that. It's like I'm kind of like an
mm.
autopilot myself, right?
Mhm.
So I love that we kind of got to this topic because it's actually really important to talk about because
Right.
there's so many factors. Like as Dan says in the
Yeah.
newspaper, I've seen women do their makeup, and
Uh,
it's just
no,
different for everybody, right? So
My
Mhm.
wife.
yeah.
no.
Yeah. I remember
Nuts.
when I first moved to Ontario, I was driving back and forth to Montreal every Friday
Right.
because I had a house
Ooh.
in Montreal, so I'd take care of the house, cut the grass, shovel the driveway, do all
The
that.
6 hour
While I was
drive,
trying
by
to
the way,
sell,
everyone who's
and
watching.
yeah, and I can't tell you how many times I would leave Transcend in Mississauga at noon on Friday and not have in my head not have a single thought, and all of a sudden I was in
Mm,
Montreal.
mm,
Okay, so unconsciously driving for 5
mm,
to 6 hours, unconsciously
mm,
just
mm,
had a little radar detector, and that was the old school radar detectors that plugged into
mm.
12 volt. That was before Waze was around, and
Haven't
and
they?
I just, and the only time my brain would hit a beat would be when the radar detector went beep beep beep, and then you'd have to unplug it because God forbid they
Right.
ping you back and
Right.
they find out that you have
Right.
it. But otherwise, it was unconscious. 6
Yeah.
hours unconscious, and I think this is where we all get into challenges and problems. Like I think anything in our life that becomes unconscious and we're not intentional about thinking about it, I
Mhm.
think we run up against an opportunity to have challenges. And whether that be, I've done this proposal a dozen times, I don't have to think about it, and I don't
Yeah.
create the
Right.
intention that I want the
Mhm.
customer to see, or
Mm.
I've tried this trick. I know on snowmobiles we always say just one more is the bad. Don't
Yeah.
do it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you go and, and I think it's for a lot of the sports world, dirt bikes, all that kind of stuff, where it's like, you do the
Mm.
jump 5 times. You're like, I'm just going to do it one more time. And that's when you get hurt because you've
Yep.
now become, oh, I'm good. Like the first time you go off the jump, everything is you're aware of everything. And like every little
Yeah.
burp in the sled or every little, for me anyways, and then, the second time it's like, okay, I can get a little more laxadaisy. And then,
Right.
the last time is when you tear your rotator cuffs. You know what I mean? So
Hey,
it's,
so Dan, I did that one more run on a snowfield in 2005, 3 rotator cuff surgeries in 5 years later. One more run.
one more run.
Who knew that wet slushy snow was like skiing into concrete? Who knew?
Yeah.
Only someone from Australia would not know that.
And that's and as we're kind of coming to an end to it, I did want to kind of highlight a little bit about the first winter storm that actually happened
Yep.
out in Utah that you guys brought up yesterday.
Yeah.
Because yesterday talking with Joe, we were talking about seasonality, how it's a big thing, right?
Mm.
Like he said, the biggest thing for him was that they can't get sand, just like sand and
Mhm.
just kind of like timelines. Jeff knows this, being in New Jersey as well. We're seeing
Interesting.
these things. So what kind of like, let's say like education, we can kind of look at it, but just give us a bit information based on that first snowstorm and what to kind of expect that we're kind of looking at.
Yeah, I'm actually writing about this in the next 2 weeks based on what some drivers tell me. Beyond the obvious, like making sure you've got chains, I would start
Yeah.
with all your airlines. So you've got to make sure you've got no liquids in your airlines, things that freeze. But I would start with personal, because there's not much good trying to fix a frozen brake drum if you've got no winter clothes. I think the thing that I see most drivers get caught with, especially those that run north-south, not so much the ones that stay below I-40, but if you're running south to north into the colder latitudes, they get caught without the right clothing. So having the right winter clothing is absolutely critical. Beanies, scarves, big jackets, boots, feet warmers, all that stuff. I've been caught trying to fix things without the right clothes. You can't
Right.
fix anything if you're cold. So I've got a piece coming out in a couple of weeks, so we probably should revisit that, Ryan. We haven't got a lot of time, but there's I've got a list of about 15 things that you need to do to winterize your truck and person and cab.
Let's do that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
We got my buddy Andrew, who does a lot of long haul, and he would go south to north, and he was doing Texas to BC and all that kind of stuff. And he goes, Dan, you would not believe how many drivers show up. And he goes, and as you're coming north, I believe it was just before. Was it just before Utah? He says there's always a state trooper that makes you chain up right there.
Yeah.
And he goes, and these guys are getting out in shorts and flip-flops because they were just in Texas. And he goes, and it's like a winter storm is blazing and they're freezing trying to put their chains on. He goes, it was crazy to see. And he goes, and they get back in the truck and they get like a quarter of the chain on. They get back and he goes, it would take them 4 hours because they just didn't have the proper attire. And you would think at this point, we've been around long enough as, let's just say, even hypothetically, if it's your first year in North America driving, hypothetically, your company understands the season change. Right. And if a company is saying, okay, you know what, guys, we're getting to that point where we're going to have freak storms that can shut things down. Let's prepare our drivers for success. And you know what I mean? I don't know. It flips my bird to see.
Yeah, it does.
Well, they've got to,
lift gates too. Lift gates for
batteries free.
Batteries.
I've not only freezing when they open, now they're icy. Drivers are slipping, and like there's all sorts of stuff.
Hey, can I lay one number on you? Because the next 2 weeks, this week's my blog post is about the sleep epidemic in the US facing teenagers, which is affecting truckers and parents. So there's a blog post out this week on it. Next week's about drowsy driving, leading into Drowsy Driving Prevention Week. And of course, daylight saving ends on 11/6. So it's a good time to be talking about sleep deprivation. But remember this, that 16 hours of sustained wakefulness equals 0.05 blood alcohol content in terms of impairment.
Wow.
16 hours awake is the same as driving at 0.05.
Is that why I like to nap every afternoon?
Probably. Well, we could talk about sleep deprivation because all those short-term memory problems you've got driving home, that's a bit of a warning sign in terms of, because the first thing that goes when you're tired is short-term working memory. You forget exits, you forget mile markers, you forget where you are. That's before you fall asleep at the wheel. So there's a progression.
Definitely, let's do that. Let's do that.
That's a big one.
That
even
applies to not only drivers, it applies to people, just us driving.
Everybody
in general. You know, and a big one too. A lot of people are being diagnosed with like sleep apnea. Like people are doing sleep clinics and things like that, and that's such a huge one. Like people thinking like not getting treated for snoring or things like that or mouth breathing, right? So I know myself. I've done a couple sleep tests myself, and just like hearing the feedback they're kind of saying too. So I wouldn't be surprised, especially like driver fitness is a big one too, right? So
my father died of his second heart attack from undiagnosed sleep apnea as a trucker all his life. It's hereditary.
Well, and then you got, of course, the wonderful healthy biscuits and gravy that everybody loves so much at the truck stops. So like, you got to, you know, that stuff comes with its own defibrillator every time you order it. Now, Ryan, have you ever had biscuits and gravy?
No, I haven't had the honor of having biscuits and gravy, but
dude, it's at once in your life you got to try it. I mean, you might not like it, but oh my God, that gravy is like 4 times thicker than Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's crazy.
It clogs your veins like
instantly.
The gravy is like how I like my women.
Stop.
Yeah,
you literally feel your heart valve stop as you eat it. It's crazy.
Oh, wow.
All right. Well, I figure like there's not a better point than to end that heart valve.
There we go.
You know? So I want to thank you.
I'm here all week, folks.
Yeah, exactly. Like you'll be here with all these. He was actually going to be starting up a pop-up of selling biscuits and gravy out of Erin, Ontario, and then you could go to one of the 3 pot stores. You know.
Well, you know what I am. You know what I am seeing is in our town is food trucks popping up all over the place,
because they don't have to pay for retail space. A lot of maybe we'll talk about that too, but like that has to do with like inflation. A lot of stores are opening and closing a lot. Like we've gotten an influx of that, but we'll save that for another time. But it's awesome to see.
We'll talk about a cliffhanger.
Ooh. I know, right? You got to tune in. Next week. You know? That's what we do. You never know when we can talk about it. So I want to thank Dean. Honestly, it's been amazing. This hour's been amazing. Having here talking about everything, especially all the impacts that's going on in our industry. Jeff, nice to see you here this morning again. I hope you had an amazing trip yesterday. Dan, you're back to 100%. I can definitely say that. So we got the team back.
Well, I'm about 6. I mean, listen, I got some great news yesterday that I'm going to share on Friday, but I feel about 60. I want to get more energized, but every time I get excited, I choke. So,
all right, well, 60 is better than some people's 100, right? So, you're killing it, my friend. So we're happy to see you back. Yeah, exactly. Everybody, thank you so much for coming out this morning. We'll be hitting out the replays at 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. Eastern time. Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. Please make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff and help our channel grow even further because we're definitely bringing all the value every day. Tomorrow is going to be personal development day. I know we're going to talk a lot, hopefully not a lot about RFPs or intention as we always kind of talk about, but thank you guys.
Jeff never talks about RFPs.
No,
What are you
no,
talking
hey,
about?
don't
That's
bring
crazy.
it up.
boy,
Don't
take
bring it up,
care.
Centurion Trucking, our motto is people before profit. Today's market requires more transparency, consistency, and focus on what our clients need to win. Centurion Trucking and American Logistics are poised to help their clients achieve and surpass their targets. If you're looking for a team that honors your needs, dreams, and aspirations, then get a hold of Daman at American Logistics or Centurion Trucking and start designing your career today.